Hey everybody, Tim Ulbrich here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. In celebration of Father's Day this weekend, I brought my dad, Tom Ulbrich, onto the show to have a conversation on entrepreneurship, fatherhood, and finance. During this episode, my dad shares his career path, starting with running a family business to starting another business in our basement, and then leading a large nonprofit in Western New York. His thoughts on my brother and I going from traditional to non-traditional career paths, how he and my mom have defined what it means to be living their rich life, and his take on redefining retirement and why it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach. This is a good one. My favorite episode thus far in the 363 episodes and nearly 7 years that we've been recording the show. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there listening. I'm rooting for you. Dad, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, it's a joy to say those words, something I haven't been able to say on the first 362 episodes of the podcast. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think we could spend hours talking about a variety of topics around fatherhood, entrepreneurship, financing. So we'll see where the conversation goes. I do want to start with your career journey. And the reason why I want to start there is that as I was talking with you about the other day, I see a lot of pharmacists that are stuck defined by the sunk cost of time and money that they invested into getting their pharmacy degree. And perhaps they're interested in something else that might be within the profession, that might be outside of the profession, but they're unable to see past the straight line path that they embarked upon, many at a young age. So with that backdrop, give us an overview of your career journey that I think highlights so well how it's really much more of a journey and not a destination.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. And cut me off if this gets a little bit long. It's a long journey, right? At my age, but excuse me. So my path started with I had one goal in life when I was graduating from high school. That was to get married to your mom as quickly as possible. So the pathway for me to do that, I didn't have any particularly great interest in one thing or another. Was overall a decent student, but the family, we had a garden center in the family landscaping business. So I'm like, let's go into the family business. I can get done with school. I went to school for ornamental horticulture, landscape design, entered the family business, got married right away, and Michael came along
Mhm.
almost immediately, then you. And for over 20 years, I stayed in the family business, not because I was necessarily passionate about it, but because it was that sort of like straight line you were talking about, where
Mhm.
you feel. I don't want to say I ever felt trapped. That's not the fair word, but I felt responsible, like it was
Mhm.
my job to provide for the family. So once you both were in college, I decided to pursue some of my dreams, which meant I went back to get my MBA. Decided to leave the family business and actually ran for public office unsuccessfully. And the reason for running was I was very involved supporting small businesses through the National Federation of Independent Business, and thought, why not do this on public policy side? But when I ran under those auspices, what happened was I had an opportunity then given to me at the University of Buffalo to run their Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership.
Mhm.
So what, hey, you want to do all this stuff? You don't need to be elected official, come here and do that. And I'll kind of speed that all up. But I was there for 12 years. I became the executive director of the Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership, then became an assistant dean and faculty member in the School of Management, where I taught entrepreneurship. And then towards the end of my time at University of Buffalo, which ended in 2020, I had a dual appointment as assistant dean to the School of Management, as well as the School of Social Work, where I
Mhm.
was working on a real passion project, and that was social innovation, or the intersection of for-profit business and social sector or nonprofit business.
Mhm.
In 2020, I was recruited by a recruiter to Goodwill. Um, have to be honest, for probably 6 or 8 phone calls. I said, thanks for calling. I'm not interested in running a bunch of retail stores. I finally did meet with the board, was really intrigued with the business model here at Goodwill, that we are a social enterprise and that we can um, we can raise money or profit through
Mhm.
our retail stores and reinvest that into our workforce development. So the challenge to me as an entrepreneur, and I didn't mention along the way we've started a couple businesses and stuff. I skipped that part, but having been an entrepreneur, the challenge was I'll come out of academia and do this in the real world, and I kind of took the bait. And here I am at
Mhm.
Goodwill. I've been here for 4 years and absolutely love the work here and feel like everything I've done prior to this, you talk about journey, all the pieces of that journey have led me to sort of my dream job where
Mhm.
everything has come together: entrepreneurship, leadership, all the things that I love to do are sitting here in this job. So to your point, with young pharmacists that are on a career path, I think the challenge for many people, especially when they have invested in education, a lot of money, a lot of time, and have a deep expertise in the field, you can get trapped and stuck because it's uncomfortable leaving something that's comfortable. But by never leaving what makes you feel comfortable is really can potentially um, really rob you, I guess is the right
Mhm.
word. I was looking for the right word. Rob you of the thrill of being able to do something that you can make a good living at and still be passionate about at the same time. And
Mhm.
I think what people have to think about is not the degree, not the technical skills that I have, but and in under that auspices of a pharmacy license, but to think about what skills do I have that
Yeah.
transfer to many other things. You're a perfect example, and many of your friends are, that you've taken those skills that come with what you've learned as a pharmacist and gained all this experience along the way. Then you're able to pivot into
Yeah.
something that uses those skills. I think we were talking about the other day, you see this a lot in people that come out of the military,
Yep.
incredibly skilled and valuable people for any organization, but it's really hard sometimes to transfer those jobs, like what you did
Mhm.
in the military, and how do they transfer out into, the business sector here back home, or and I think what happens there is you have to think about skills,
Mhm.
not think about titles, not think about licenses, but think about the diverse set of skills that you've learned, and that you're a unique individual that's put together all these little pieces along the way that makes you special in whatever that next step is that you're after.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to this idea of identity not being attached to the degree or the title. And I think for our profession, we struggle with that, right? Because at 18, 19, 20, 21, there's this story of, hey, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to have a
Right.
pharmacy degree. You're going to do X, Y, or Z. And it feels big. It feels weighty that you have to make these decisions. And I think there's actually a lightness and a relief, as scary as it may sound to the listeners, of kind of stepping into this uncomfortable territory and detaching yourself from the identity of the degree or the identity of, I'm a hospital pharmacist or I'm an industry pharmacist. It's
Right.
about these transferable skills that we're talking about. And I think honestly, one of the many things you taught me, maybe it was said, maybe it was unsaid, it was role modeled. Like I lived that firsthand. I saw you go through this journey. I was in high school, finishing high school, going into college when you made this transition and entered into the MBA, ran for political office, took the next step. I remember the phone call when I was in the airport traveling when you were interviewing with Goodwill, right? Like we've lived these things firsthand. And my brother Mike, he's a great example of this. He's an industrial engineer by training. He went and worked in corporate finance, was very successful. And then he got 10-ish years in and realized, like, hey, I want something different for my life, for my family. And the pivot moment for him was when he was able, with the help of a coach and some others, to detach himself from the identity with the degree or the identity with the role that he had spent his first decade of his career in. And that's uncomfortable. But I want to talk about that uncomfortableness
Yeah.
because human beings are wired for safety, right? That
Right.
that's normal, and everything else is a risk. And for pharmacists, that's real. Doctorate degree, good paycheck, lots of debt to pay off. Any other path than the quote norm is risk, and that's hurting our profession, because what's the incentive for taking
Right.
risk and taking innovation? So as you've taught many entrepreneurs and you've lived this journey yourself, what would you have to share to those folks that are, hey, I'm wired for safety. I see that. And this idea of stepping outside of that is uncomfortable.
Yeah. So that's great background and really a really good question. And remind me, I want to get back to we're Father's Day, and I want to talk a little bit about how parents are part of that journey
Yeah.
with us, shaping us too. We'll come back around to that, but back to you know I'm going to go back to the classroom for a minute. So one of the interesting things I taught entrepreneurship, and anybody on here should be saying, how do you teach entrepreneurship? Well, the fact is, you don't. Really, to become an entrepreneur, you need to live it. What we teach people are, here's some best practices: how to validate a business, how to do customer
Hmm.
discovery. But what you're really referring to is something that I picked up. I don't even remember where I picked it up from a long time ago. Is in entrepreneurship is the concept of 50,000 chunks of experience.
Mm.
So meaning that you will not be successful until you gain that experience, and you gain that everywhere. From, you talked about a pharmacy degree, but you gain it also from role modeling. So both of my sons now are entrepreneurs. Not I was an entrepreneur. My dad was, in a sense, an entrepreneur. So we learn these skills by role modeling and seeing it. One of the interesting things when you look at data around entrepreneurship, and most of the data I'm familiar with is around minority entrepreneurship and women-owned businesses. Until the last maybe 10 years, those demographics struggled mightily with being able to be successful entrepreneurs. And the question
Hmm.
is why? What the research showed was the why is, where's the role model? Where's
Mm.
somebody that looks like me that has done this before? So a long-winded answer to say, yes, we as human beings are risk averse. We are wired that way. And the further down a path you get in a good career, like being a pharmacist, the that risk aversion just tightens, and it's even harder to walk away. And many entrepreneurs, you don't need to be successful. Like Mark Zuckerberg's an outlier, the
Hmm.
21-year-old that created something and blew it up. Most entrepreneurs are successful later in life after they gain their experience, and they are in a stuck
Mm.
track. But what often happens is we have a financial downturn, something happens, and maybe they lose their job, and they're sort of forced into entrepreneurship and recognizing they can do that. And
Yep.
if I can I back up to parenting for a
Yeah.
minute?
Let's do it. Yep.
Because I think it's important. And know and answer your question. Well, not question, but your comment about, did I role model for you? No, not deliberately at all. In fact, not at all. But it may have happened. So I think one of the challenges too, as parents, we want what we think is best for our children. I think everybody does,
Hmm.
and sometimes we maybe think about it through the lens of safety for our
Yes.
kids, and we don't we're afraid, and we almost drive people to a profession. I remember when
Hmm.
you were thinking about college, you didn't really know
Hmm.
what you wanted to do, and I think we were like, oh, this is probably, you're really good in these things.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that's something you were passionate about or wanting to do. So I think from a parenting standpoint, and I wish I would have known these things 40 years ago, but we did the best we could with what we
Yep.
knew,
That's
right?
right.
Um, Probably would have done things differently to just try to understand, now that I know how successful you can be as an entrepreneur. Focus a lot more with understanding the unique individual that each child is, and spending a lot more time in creative play, teaching about innovation,
Mm.
and not so much in the structure of, I don't want to say school, because I don't want to say school's bad. It's not.
Sure. Yep.
But I don't think we give our kids, either in school or sometimes as parents, enough teaching or learning around creativity. Because the truth is, the world we live in today, um, a degree, a piece of paper, that's great. And I know it's required for many professions. But what you really need to do to be successful today is, you need to know how to identify what the true problem is.
Yes.
So when you see a problem, how do I look for the root cause of that problem and know how to do that, and you know how to seek out information. Really, those are and solve problems creatively, which is really
Yeah.
creative problem solving.
Yeah, and you said the other day when we were talking, you said, "Hey, if we as a nation, right, want to remain great for centuries to come," we talked about two things, personal finance education. Our listeners will give an amen to that, and then creative problem solving,
Yep.
right? And it's interesting. I was just reading an article the other day. You think about all the focus around STEM over the last 10, 15 years, and I'm not saying STEM is bad in any way, shape, or form, but you even look at an area of study like computer science. And I was reading an article about computer science graduates coming out having difficulty finding jobs because of AI and some of the replacement and technology and thing that's going on, coding, et cetera. And, we have this huge surge of focus in that area. You have an overabundance, right, in some regards of people that are going into those fields. And now we have disruption that's happening right now. But when you look at something like creative problem solving, very hard to teach in a structured environment, very important skill that translates that is not easily replaceable as we think about where trends are going.
Sure, sure. And what you just said is really critically important. Imagine if we taught these two things from the time you're a kindergartner or even before: financial literacy and creative problem solving.
Yeah.
If that was baked in to the basic, sort of like a core curriculum, that was part of the core curriculum, those things, it would really change so much for the better. Because in the work that you do, how many people don't understand financial
Hmm.
literacy? And we can't blame the individuals. Yes, you're responsible to learn that, but they've never learned it. And they also, back to role modeling, we talked about with entrepreneurship, you also role model people with money too, right? And sometimes
Totally.
you have poor role models, quite frankly,
Yeah.
that aren't sure themselves because they never learned how to handle their finances. So I think those two things could really, really start to teach things. And what's fascinating to me, we talked a little bit the other day about the Medici effect, which
Yep.
is really important. Which, if anybody's interested in that, maybe you could put in the footnotes. Franz Johansson has
Mhm.
uh, wrote the book and has some really great, simple TED talks to learn about it. But it's really around the concept that creativity and innovation are enhanced by diversity, which is really interesting to me because we're so focused on diversity, which it's important, but
Mhm.
it's all those diverse experiences, which ties back to our
Yes.
beginning discussion. And it's diversity in everything. It's a diversity in the people we work with. And that diversity isn't just ethnic diversity, it's age diversity,
Mhm.
education diversity, likes diversity. It's all that diversity. When you take people that are diverse and you put them together, the sharing and the creative problem solving that can happen is just really, really amazing. So again, to teach that and to stop, you know, that whole concept sort of busts up our limited thinking, and that's
Yep.
what holds us back. Is
Yep.
is we're just back to risk aversion. We're wired to be risk averse. Okay, I'm making 110 grand as a pharmacist or whatever pharmacists make, and why do I want to give that up? I'm like, maybe you want to give that up to pursue something that you're really, really passionate about, that you're going to thrive in. And maybe you're going to make way more money doing
Mhm.
something that you're passionate about. And again, I don't believe in the old saying, do what you love and you're going to be fine. I think you have to balance that. You
That's
can't
right.
just ignore, you have to look at your skills. But what also is nice about having a career like a pharmacist, you have the safety of your career while you build something. So if you're really want to do it and you're willing to put in that extra work in the evenings and the weekends, you can build it while you have the safety of your career at the same time.
Can we talk about that for a minute? Because I think we tend to, generally speaking, but pharmacists especially because of the things we've been talking about with, some of the fixed mindset around the degree and the ceiling of income and the debt we have to pay off, we tend to miscalculate risk, meaning we blow it out of proportion. And I found myself doing this early in my own journey. And one of the things I often say is that at the end of the day, your pharmacy license is the greatest emergency fund you're ever going to have.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah, that's true.
so if you take a risk and worst case scenario happens and it doesn't work out, to be able to have something you can fall back on that you can make 55 to $65 an hour. I'm not saying you want to go do the work that's available necessarily or want to do it forever, but that is an incredible asset to lean on. And it really changes your perception of worst case scenario and taking risk. And I'm curious from your perspective of your own business journey and mentoring many other business owners, how do you help people really evaluate risk objectively when it becomes so emotional often that we look at it and perhaps it looks scarier than it really is?
I think that's an excellent point. So as we keep saying, people are naturally risk averse, most of us. Here's the other fascinating, studies around entrepreneurship. Many people, and I think people that are maybe in your industry that are considering doing something different or building something, they look at entrepreneurs and assume that they are these insane risk takers that throw it all down. I guess would be the equivalent of going to a casino and putting all your money on
Yeah.
black or red, whatever it is. The fact is, entrepreneurs are really great risk mitigators, is
Hmm.
what they are. They don't gamble. What they do, they try to get the risk, they try to do whatever they can to identify what the risks are, mitigate what they can, and then understand what true risks they're taking. And I know myself and probably most successful entrepreneurs, they're not taking a 80% chance of having a loss. They're looking to make sure that they're way better than a 50-50 if I go
Yep.
into this. And how do they do that? The way you do that is lots of research, lots of pro forma work, like trying to understand how I'm going to make this work. But the most important thing is if you have a new idea, customer discovery,
Hmm.
speaking to potential customers early and often, talking about what you're going to try to sell or what you're going to present to somebody. And if the market is there, you'll be able to see that the market is there, because all too often many of us have a passion about something and go run off and build a business without ever asking, is somebody going to buy my product, right? And there's I've done that a couple times, and you start the customer discovery and realize you're the only person that's interested in this. So it's really important to not be the gambler, is what it boils down
Yeah.
to, and to do that work that you can do, and think about mitigating risk before you take that next step forward.
That's so good. I often say that the best businesses are when you can combine something you're passionate about, plus a problem that needs to be solved, plus is something that people are willing to pay for. And sometimes you can have one of those or two of those, but not three of those, right? You can have, as you mentioned, you can have a passion, but people may not want what you're selling, or it's not necessarily solving a problem that is as big as maybe you think it is. Or you could be solving a problem that, isn't big enough that people are willing to pay for it. And so you've got to really do all of those things. And hopefully there is passion behind it because, as you know firsthand, business is going to have ups and downs. It's inevitable. It's going to have highs. It's going to have lows. And I believe that when the lows are there, like you better have a really strong passion that's kind of grounding you
Right.
to keep you anchored in those seasons where things aren't going so well.
No, dead on. And I think our society too, we have to be really careful about that word passion,
Yes.
meaning um I'd like to talk, flip that a little bit and say purpose. You purpose driven type of
Hmm.
work. In our world today, I think we mix up sometimes passion and purpose. And I just wrote a blog post recently where I described a little bit somebody I had found that was very purpose driven in their work and what they did. And I had said in the blog post, well, I have a passion for music. I love music. And I have four guitars. I can't play any of them. Right. So am I really, really, is that a true passion or is it a like? So I
Yeah.
think, I think that'd be my first sort of tip to people. Make sure it's not just something you're interested in and you like, it really truly is a passion. And again, in today's world, I think we're always told, well, I'm passionate about this, I'm passionate about that. But making sure it's a passion. And if it's a true passion, you will never feel like you're working, because the drive, that purpose driven drive, it just feeds you. It gives you
Hmm.
energy. It gives you, it builds you up. Even if you're working full time, you've got the juice to do something at night because you're building something that you are truly
Yeah.
passionate or purpose driven about.
I want to go back to your career journey. It strikes me as you're talking, and I kind of look at mine as the same, and I don't think that's by accident. We talked about role modeling and being comfortable with, kind of a staggered approach. It really feels more like a rock wall that you've climbed than you have climbed a ladder, meaning there has been exciting progressions, but you've acquired these skills. You've gone sideways. You've gone into different industries. You started really what I would call, if we oversimplify, your first half of your career, in a family business, starting your own
Sure.
business. Then you had this time where you went back and got some additional training that led to other opportunities. You then were mentoring other business owners and coaching through the university, and now you're in this stage where you're leading a large nonprofit organization. And so, as you look at that journey in hindsight, are there threads that you see that go across all of those, even though those roles are very different? You've talked about entrepreneurship and problem solving. If you get a little bit more granular, are there
Sure.
things within those experiences where you're like, yeah, I see the obvious connections?
Sure. I think one is leadership. Um, I like to lead, and I learned, actually, you talk about role modeling early in life, that I had some of those pieces that would make me a decent leader. And that was in high school, a coach actually making me captain of the team when I was nowhere near the best athlete. And my brain always said, well, the captains are the superstars, right? But somebody identifying early, seeing something where you can connect people, you can figure things out, and how people can work together. So I think leadership is one of them. The other is, I really enjoy fixing things and building things, and building teams up, and I can see that connection throughout the way. And very, I think the other thing we also didn't talk about, but your mom and I started an e-commerce company that we
Hmm.
sold a few years ago, that started as a catalog business, really out of necessity and seeing opportunity. So I think also, just the other thread is just opportunity seeking.
Hmm.
So imagine in a stable family business the stress that can put on things, because in a family business, a lot of it is about stability,
Yep.
and everything's okay. And that's not true always. I get that. But you have somebody that's always kind of like trying to push the limits and looking for something new. And I don't want to say never satisfied, but it might feel to other people like
Yep.
you're never satisfied. But what's the thread? I think a lot of it is building things, a lot of it is leadership, and a lot of it is seeing problems and wanting to solve them, thinking there's a better way to do something.
You said never satisfied, and I know you hedged that and caught yourself there, which I agree with. But I want to go there for a minute, because I think one of the things that you and I share is very much an achievement mindset that I
Yeah.
often say, through my own work of counseling and other things, I've learned that it can be my greatest asset and my greatest crippler. Meaning that, like, it's an innate gift that I can solve problems, I can see opportunities, I can, build a vision, execute on the vision, get people excited about the vision, get things going. I like to build and create. I'm not a sustainer necessarily as
Yeah.
well. But if I'm not careful, like, that can get out of balance, and it can be the next thing, the next thing, the next
Yeah.
thing, without seeing kind of the bigger picture of, like, what's the purpose? What are we doing here? It's not just about achieving one thing after another. So, share with me your journey and that kind of never satisfied achievement, and how you've reconciled that. I know you've done work on that yourself, and how
Sure.
you've come to appreciate, like, hey, that's a good gift and a skill, but it also comes with challenges.
It's a great gift and a skill, and it comes with lots of challenges, right? So, yes, we do share that. And I think that it's probably not uncommon with achievers. Yeah, I guess that's what I would call it. And it's almost like overachieving. So I didn't really address this until later, but I still work with the same coach, and the coach I work with, he really like nailed it for me one day and said, "You know what, Tom? You're really good at climbing small mountains, grabbing the flag as fast as you can, getting the top, and then looking around for the next mountain, the next peak."
Mm,
But he's like, "Why don't you get on a big mountain where you can change the world? And it's going to take you years and years. And think about that journey as a climb and a plateau, a climb and a plateau, a climb and a plateau," which has really helped me. Also, to, I went through. Thankfully, it's no big problem, but went through some medical stuff the last few months, which made me really reevaluate like what's important to me,
mm,
and what
mm-hmm.
do I want to do, what don't I want to do. And unfortunately, most people don't have those events until they're in their 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
And it's something we should maybe think about a little bit earlier. But let me go back to your thing about achieving. So I think number one is if it's purpose driven, make that mountain bigger. So
Mhm.
we're wired to climb. I bet you most of pharmacists listening on here didn't get through pharmacy school without being a
Mhm.
type A, at least some level achiever. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, what I want people to do is to understand what type of entrepreneur you and me are. We're founders. We
Mhm.
are founders. We're the people that are good at seeing a problem, seeing if there's a market for it, identifying the resources it's going to take, pulling together the finances, finding the team. Um, and that is a skill set that's super important to a startup. What we're best to do, though, is to build a team and go on to the next business or the next idea and not trying to manage the team because our type of personalities get bored with management. And yeah, we could argue like, well, you need to fix yourself. No, we don't need to fix ourselves. We need to lean into who
Lean
we
in.
are,
Yes.
surround yourself with people. And my team, if they were listening here at Goodwill, would start laughing right now because they know I'm going to be popcorning ideas all day long. And I have surrounded myself with people that are good at operational excellence. I'm not.
Implementing.
I'm
Mhm.
good at identifying the opportunity, solving problems, ideas, but actually, as a company gets larger, putting that day-to-day operational management in, you have to surround yourself with people. Comes back to our conversation about diversity. Diversity makes it all better. So you have a diverse group of, managers on your team too that bring different skill sets to the table. You never want to surround yourself with people just like you,
That's right.
because what you'll be doing is seeing opportunities, not properly implementing the structure to run the business, and you're going to be starting and failing, starting and failing, starting and failing.
You know, it's interesting as you're talking, I was just reflecting back on, some of the experiences I've had within organizations where I've built and created things and where I've gotten in trouble is when I built and created and then I haven't had the resources to help sustain, maintain, or be comfortable and willing to let go for whatever reason. And then all of a sudden you end up in this phase where you're trying to implement and continue to implement and sustain when you really are a builder. And that's not good for you as the individual. It's not good for the organization either, right? Because I would argue goodwill is best when you are building and popcorning ideas. So, how do we surround you with people as you have that can help you implement? And good leaders, good managers will see that with their people and really help identify and say, oh, hey, Tom's a builder, he's an innovator. He's not a sustainer. And that's okay. Like we need him building, we need him out there innovating for the organization.
Yeah, I think the way you attract people is the one thing you must have as a leader in an organization, especially as you get into larger organizations. The difference between a small business and a larger business is really the complexity of what you're doing. So I always think of management from sort of the team of team concept. You have all these little mini teams that come together as a big entity, right? Like a matrix. And it's in a larger business, you have the complexity. And how do you attract talent? You attract talent through leadership, but what the important part is creating a vision with a clear pathway forward. So this is where strategy, strategic planning, and communicating that in an interesting way, not a book that's it's up on a shelf someplace that nobody's going to read, but how do you tell the story? What's the story about where we're going as a company? And if you think of your role as a CEO or leader, I always think of it as you're the chief energy officer, the chief
Mm,
inspiration officer. You're not the chief executive officer, although that's the title, right? Your job is to really rally the troops, create the vision. And I always say, carry that flag in front of everybody. And remember, just when you are sick and tired of hearing yourself talk about where we're going, people are only beginning to listen.
it's
And
great.
it's really important that we stay persistent as leaders, and also find creative ways to talk about strategy. So, what we do here, we actually take our strategic plan and we put it into different types of journey that we can share with the frontline people. So the first 3 years of our strategy, we took our strategy, overlaid it on a map, and we created a journey from Buffalo, New York to Hawaii,
Mm,
and we're able to show people like where are we at on this journey. So really gamifying it a little bit.
yep.
I think that's a good way. But when you have a clear vision, you can attract and retain top talent. You also have to invest in that talent. You can't be afraid to spend money to bring talent in, right? You need the best of the best. And then how do you keep them? And you keep them through good leadership, involving them. One thing you have to watch out as a founder leader is getting out of their way sometimes. Like again, if you're a problem solver, you want to jump in and you can't solve problems for everybody. You have to ask the
Hmm.
questions that help them solve the problems
Yeah.
if you're going to build a great business.
Let me ask you a question. I think one probably I've never asked you before, but when I think of your journey, it really feels like the point you went to pursue your MBA and went back to college. And I remember, speaking of role modeling, I remember at our old house, you guys don't live there anymore. I remember you at the computer in the living room, going through the application process, doing prereqs that ultimately led to the MBA program that led to other opportunities. But that really feels like a transition point where you said, "Hey, I'm going to really live my life versus, this being defined for me, and I'm going to really take some autonomy and ownership of the next step, the next phase." And I'm just curious of how you arrived at that decision, right? Because that was an investment of time, it was an investment of money. And to be frank, it has to take some level of humility because you have how many years of business experience? And now I have to go back into a classroom. And I know you went to an executive program where there's more experienced individuals, but you and I both know that a lot of people go into an MBA program with zero experience.
Right.
You had the experience. So, what made you say, hey, this is a skill that I need to acquire? This is a degree that I need to acquire. And that ultimately led you to pulling the trigger and making that decision?
Yeah. So I felt, excuse me, excuse me, the, it actually was part of a journey. So multiple times I started back as early as my mid 20s to go to school. I was going to go back and become a teacher. Um, I did a lot of coaching, like some significant coaching for a long, long time, and had lots of times that I was, if I look backwards, right, it was a journey, like gaining the courage to step forward. And where the transition point was, it was right when you were in college, because at that time I felt like we had got our children to a point where they're going to be okay, and I could now invest
Mm,
and do this. So the MBA was probably it. And why the MBA? The MBA was really more about credentialing, I guess, similar to a pharmacist getting a license. And it might have been a little bit of imposter syndrome, to be honest with you, too, feeling like I don't have something that says I have all this business experience. And in order to be a successful politician or whatever
hmm.
the next step was going to be, I felt like I needed to credential myself at some level. Little did I know that that journey was going to be so much more than credentialing. To be
Hmm.
exposed to other people that thought like I did, felt like I did, that were on these journeys, to do whatever they were. And quite frankly, I learned a lot. A lot of people in my class were on that straight line journey that you talked about. And it was just another step. And I learned, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. I want to continue to have that freedom of doing my own thing. And what was unique about UB hired me as a clinical professor with the understanding that I had this e-commerce business and that I would continue to run that e-commerce business
Yeah.
because it was the clinical contribution,
Experience.
the
Yep.
experience to what I was doing, in the classroom.
So let's talk about the e-commerce business. You talked about the family business. So if listeners are curious, it was Ulbrich's Tree Farm and Ulbrich's Tree Farm and Garden Center that my grandfather started, that my dad and his brother took over. Ultimately, you started an e-commerce business called Momore Landscape Supplies. And let me paint the picture for our listeners because this goes back to role modeling experience. I remember in our old home, I probably was, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, something like that, maybe a little bit younger, a little bit older. I remember I can see the carpet in the basement. I can see in the back of our basement where there was storage area, you had built shelves that you had white index cards. I see the black Sharpie that was the inventory for the distribution of the business. I can see the desk where you would do the financials, and eventually that would go into a warehouse, and what you created in the business became a much, much bigger business. So why start that business, and how did you come to realize that that one in particular was an opportunity? Oh, and by the way, I'm going to take this on in addition to another business I have, and I've got a young family that I'm raising.
Sure. So I think one of it was seeing an opportunity. So we started the business. It was related to the garden center business. We had a large landscaping business. We were buying so many parts to repair our mowers and all of our equipment. I decided to go directly to manufacturer to try to save some money. Was successful in negotiating with them to buy some parts and parlayed that into selling those parts to other people. So it started. I remember if your mom was on here, a lot of this was thanks to your mom's hard work
I
and
remember that
supporting
too.
my, yeah.
Hmm.
But the first catalog I created, we created a catalog on a typewriter in our basement, stapled it together, and was really successful for that. So that grew. We ran it out of the house until it got big enough that it was disruptive to the neighbors. And quite frankly, it was a bit unfair to the family business as this is growing. So I sold it to the family business, and we grew it then within the family business. I bought it back years later, and then we exited it back in 2019. But that started out of the thrill of building something, seeing the opportunity for it,
Hmm.
and the energy came from just building something. Like it was fun. It was an
Yeah.
opportunity. It was a way to make some extra money. And along the way, as my journey increased, really, your mom ran that business. If I'm being honest, once I went to the University of Buffalo, she managed it, ran it with the team, and until we were able to exit, I had some involvement in it, but not on the day to day. But there's another example, right? The founder gets excited, starts a
Yeah.
business, and walks away, and goes and does something else. So there, that backs up your other part of our discussion.
Well, thankfully, mom's an implementer, so there's a good
He's a good implementer.
and a
Yes.
sustainer. So there's good um, connection there. Do you think it was fair as you look back on that? You said that you started this, you had the idea, you felt like, hey, there's some rub here now with the family business, so you sold it to the business to then come and buy it back, which I'm assuming you buy it back at a premium, and then you grow it and eventually sell the business. Like, as you look back, like, was that fair, or was that just some of the dynamics that were there with the family business?
No, maybe a little dynamics, but I think in the big picture it was fair. I think the discussion with my dad was, and actually he helped start it. He invested in it, so
Oh, cool.
he was supportive of it. I borrowed $10,000 from him and paid it back over 3 years. That's how we started the business. But I think it grew to the point, and in all fairness to him as the leader of the family business, right? I think the rub was, or not rub, but the question was, you're taking a salary from here, you're doing that and taking a salary from there. Is this fair to the rest of the family? And I think the answer was getting big enough that the reality was it probably wasn't fair. So the discussion was, you can pick, you can either come here and do this, or you can leave, and it wasn't done in a negative way. It was just like, here's the options. And so I went back and said, well, how about we fold it into the family business, and that's what we did. And so I don't think it was unfair looking back. I think the entrepreneur in me wants to say it was unfair. Like, why can't I do all these things at the same time? But thinking as a leader of a
Yeah.
business, I would certainly hear if I had somebody moonlighting, building something, there's going to be a point where it gets big enough that I'm like, are you really doing everything you need to do your job well? So not unfair at all.
That was exactly the thought I had. There's a combination, right? If someone's looking at this like as an investor, they would say like, "No, Tom, it was your idea. Like you were working your butt off. You came up with the idea." But if you're thinking about it as a leader, if you're thinking about it as a family, you have to put all these factors into
You do.
play, right? When you're making these decisions.
You do. And I had the option to take it off on my own, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that was one of the options, was to just go down that path and grow it. But what happens again, safety plays in, right?
Hmm.
So that's a safety decision. What would have happened if we would have taken it off on our own? I don't know, but I know we were scared. It's not big enough yet to give us the security, back to our security discussion,
Yeah.
right? and building up that courage over many, many years to step out on your own.
Which is interesting because you would then take those experiences, right? You lived this for 2 decades plus, and you would then apply and implement those and coach hundreds, thousands of entrepreneurs in their own journey as they're navigating some of these things. So there's the direct influence and impact from business. There's the indirect, and obviously you're doing it and leading an organization right now. I'm curious, as you look back now, making the decision to work for the family business, right? Ultimately, you'd kind of pivot mid career, but if you go back to those first couple decades, making the decision to work for a family business, that you then ended up starting your own business. As with all family businesses, there's challenges that come into play, right? So, as you look back at that journey, like, would you do it all over again?
I think so. Um, there's pieces I'd like to eliminate for a bunch of different reasons, the struggles part of things, but looking back of who I was at the time, I wouldn't be who I am today without all those experiences. And sure, I could go back and say, oh, if I would have went to got my MBA when I was younger, but a whole bunch of things could have changed. But would I ever have learned all the pieces that make me who I am today?
Yeah.
And the answer is probably, well, not probably. The answer is no. It'd be a very different human being. And the truth is, I would probably be, because of the safety factor, have stuck in something I don't like to do. So
Hmm.
this has been a long journey, and God works that way sometimes. That you have to learn. You got to put your time in, and maybe mine's longer than most people, but I've never been happier than where I am today. And I feel like all those little pieces of making this world successful today and enjoying what I do came from all those struggles, all
Hmm.
those learnings, all the good and bad of when you went through. And if you wouldn't went through them, you wouldn't have the skill set that you have today.
I love that because I think sometimes when we make pivots in our careers and our lives, we run the risk of throwing out the experiences of where we're going into the future. And I think so often the story is, one that you're sharing, right? Of, hey, sure, could this have been different? Or I would have loved if this went smoother, whatever would be the case. But those experiences, journeys led to the moments that are here, led to the development, the resilience, all the skills that you've learned along the way that are allowing you now to do the work that you're doing. So I think that's a great, great reflection. I want to come back. We talked a little bit about this, but Mike and I both started in very traditional career pathways and now are both in entrepreneurial career pathways. So Mike, I alluded to this earlier, he graduated as an industrial engineer, went into corporate finance, very successful, ended up leaving that work at the time. He was living in London, doing some international banking work. Just had my niece, Anna Lee, decided they were going to move from London back to Buffalo without a plan. And he just kind of knew, hey, this is a point we need to pivot. Ultimately, would lead an advanced manufacturing company for several years, and then has since launched out to have a successful consulting business. And he also owns a business as well. So he's got a couple different things there. So went from a very traditional pathway to a non-traditional. My story somewhat similar as well. Starting in a very traditional pathway of pharmacy. I'm still connected to the profession, but in a very indirect way, having an impact in a way that maybe I didn't necessarily think at the beginning. So as you look at that from your experiences and kind of where we're going, and you think about your own journey, we've talked about safety. Like, does that scare you as a father? Does that excite you? Like, how do you think of that?
There's times when it scares me. There's no question, right? Um, and I think there's that safety baked in as a parent, right? Like you want to make sure everything's okay. But if you look at the the person, you and Michael as a whole, as an individual, and you look at the happiness level and even when there's struggles, you're doing things that you love to do, so it's actually quite interesting and rewarding for me to watch it. I can't speak for your mom. She might be a little bit more nervous, but I can it's fun to see that entrepreneurship is part of your lives and you're experiencing
Mm.
some of the struggles but a lot of success from it. And I think about you. I know your time with family and everything and the flexibility that comes with being an entrepreneur you would never have
Right.
in a traditional career, right? And I know you work really hard, but you work when you need to work, and you build time in to support the family when you need it. So I think seeing you do what you love to do is the more rewarding part, even though it can be scary at times. Like, is everything okay? Is everything going to be okay? But luckily, you both have done fantastic jobs in with your businesses, and are doing, great work, as well as seem to be loving what you're doing. So it's rewarding at this point.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things I think about this a lot with the boys is like, how do we hold the space to not project our desires onto them? Whether that's a desire of safety or, it's easy for me to project my interests, my skills, but to really try to see them each uniquely and individually, so hard to do. So hard to do. And I think that, not projecting our desires, what we determine success may or may not look like, is so hard. But I know one of the great joys that I have is whether or not the boys decide to pursue entrepreneurship. I don't know. Like if it's for them, great. If it's not, that's fine too. But there's a thread that you can see across generations, which is so cool, right? So they're not in the house with you, but the behaviors, the skills, right, are being transferred from the role modeling that I had, and now the role modeling that I'm giving them, the good and the bad. It's something I often think about, that they hear Jess and I talking about business every day, and I'm trying to be careful about, that's not just complaining, but they also hear the wins and the successes, and hey, this happened, and this transformation with a client, and this happened with a team member, the highs and the lows, right? Because I think that I don't want to give them an over glorified image of it. I don't want to give them a gloom and doom,
Right,
vision of what
right.
it could be as well. So
Yeah, I think holding space for, we were talking about this the other day. You and I were talking about this, is holding space for the individual gift that God made in each child, right, is really important. And it's something I very much appreciate in today's parenting. It seems to be
mm,
much more thoughtful than we were parenting, is like thinking like, what makes that person unique? What are they truly interested in? What jazzes them, what gets them excited, and also what are the things that maybe are going to derail them because of their personality and the people there. But I really appreciate that thought about giving kids space to be who they are. But you also hit on something, like many things, and I'm not an expert on all these, but many things you can look back and you can see there's generational, like generational curses, generational blessings.
totally.
If you look back, like in our family, there was, it goes back even further. So your grandpa's dad, so your great great grandpa, he actually worked for American Airlines, but he was he was an entrepreneur within
Yep.
an industry. So that's another thing you can do, right? You can be entrepreneurial within a bigger business. He was at the very, very early stages of flight, and
Mm-hmm.
worked his way from sweeping floors to being the lead of all mechanics in the country at one time for American Airlines. So,
Mm-hmm.
and very, in aviation was like this new industry, scary. Nobody wanted to do it. Planes used to fall out of the sky sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and prior to that, on your grandmother's side, so your great grandmother's dad was an entrepreneur and had a giant jelly factory, which is
Brinkman's
just,
jelly.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, Brinkman. So it, you can see it, and I'm sure it goes back earlier
Yep.
than that. So I think role modeling back to, yes, that happens, but I think it happens more frequently than we see, and we're not forcing that role modeling. It's people wiring to it, right? It's that
Yeah.
young mind seeing it, wiring it, and normalizing something. So your life would be really scary to some other kids that were brought up in a very traditional family. So they're going to be even more risk averse. I don't mean traditional family, I mean
Yep.
traditional career path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where dad goes to work, mom goes to work, they work 8:30 to 5 o'clock in a big company, whatever it is, where your children are seeing a, there's another way I can do things too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's likely they will do something creative or entrepreneurial. I would say there's probably a high propensity, and part of that journey back to 50,000 chunks of experience might be that they work in industry for a period of time.
Yep.
They may always have that itch of,
Yep.
I want to go do something else, and they'll see an opportunity and they'll, follow it.
So let's shift gears and talk about some financial aspects. After all, this is a financial show, and I'd love to pick your brain, as it relates to your own financial journey. I think a lot of wisdom to share with our listeners. And one of the things I want to start this conversation with is we often talk about the importance of striking the balance between saving for the future, right, planning for retirement, taking care of our future selves, while also living a rich life today. And I know, as someone who's a saver, and who does a good job of thinking at the future, there is that balance for you. And I think that's something you've probably been working on throughout your career. And so my question is, like, how have you approached that balance? And like, as you think about this for you and mom, like, what does that rich life look like? What does that mean to the two of you?
Yeah, that's a hard and interesting question. The fact is, I think you can get caught up in the extremes of both, like not understanding finances and maybe never saving for anything and living paycheck to paycheck. And you can go to the other extreme of over saving, if that's such a thing. You're the financial
It
expert, not
is.
me.
Mm-hmm.
Over saving and never having life experiences with your family, with your spouse, with that, and also never having the thrill of philanthropic giving and
Mm-hmm.
supporting other things with your money, depending on what you personally believe you should be doing with that. So I think we found a good balance. I'm not going to lie. I still think we're fine at this point in our lives, but I'm always thinking like, man, it'd be nice to have a little bit, bigger nest
Mm-hmm.
egg, a little bit bigger nest egg. But I think we found a really good balance many years ago of starting to make sure we created experiences with family. Your mom and I, we do stuff with all of you, right? We try to
Mm-hmm.
create those experiences with family vacations. We also do vacations on our own to be a way to recharge, to spend time with each other. And we do a significant amount of that. We do, you know, um, some philanthropic giving that we
Mm-hmm.
think is really important, supporting causes that are important to us. But I do think finding that balance is important, and I'm not sure. I think where you find that, I believe it's just like the other topic we've been talking about. It's a learned skill. It can be taught, but it's probably modeled and learned
Mm-hmm.
because one of the things I have noticed is human beings all have a different relationship with money,
Totally.
and a lot of it is what they experience. If you grew up in poverty, you may be really, risk averse about spending money, or you may be the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend everything I make because I saw somebody lose it all, or I
Mm-hmm.
lived with nothing for so long. I want to make it up. And a great example of this is your grandmother, our great grandmother, lived through the Depression. So
Yeah.
her dad was the Brinkman's Jelly, lost everything in the stock market. And to the day she passed away, if she had a cup of tea, she would reuse the tea bag
Mm-hmm. I remember
2 or
that.
3 times because that was how she was wired. Like, why would I waste this when there's still something good in it? So
Yeah.
I think those are situational, they're how you grow up. But again, financial literacy and education and the work that you're doing and the work that people are doing that are on, listening to this, super, super crucial that we understand how we're wired around money
Mm-hmm.
and the pros and cons of our genotype or whatever you want to call it, that is who we are around money. But back to us, I think we found a good balance. Now we're thinking about the point will come time soon. Like, how do you spend it down?
Yeah.
And how much do you want to pass on to the next generation? But all those decisions, and I think for me that's more the hardest part going to be, and I think that's where your company or your business's type of work, I believe where you really earn your money is probably working with people that are spending money down, because that can be complicated. What do I spend first? How much can I spend? Am
Yeah.
I going to run out of money? you know um all those type of things. But I it's a real thing, right? People's relationship with money, and it's all very different. Don't know it to be a fact, but I can imagine it could be very stressful in a relationship too. If you have people that come at if their relationship with money as a child was very different, and then
Mm-hmm.
coming together and trying to manage finances together. So important work you all are doing in your company.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the relationship with money. It's until we get real with that, and honestly self-reflect. What is our relationship with money? How healthy is it? Where do the behaviors come from? Does it cause anxiety, fear, shame, guilt? Do we have an
Hmm.
open hand, a closed hand? Without judge, as soon as we can actually understand and assess that, we can get real with the financial plan. Because as much as we want to say it's all objective, X's and O's, it's not. It's not. I mean, that's all important. Of course it is. But there is so much behavior, so much emotion, so much learned experiences. Great grandma's a great example. It didn't matter if she had $100 in the bank or $100 million in the bank. She was going to reuse that tea bag,
Right.
right? The
Right.
objective numbers didn't matter. Like,
Right.
and we have to think back to what was the dinner table experience like? What were those? And we can't change those experiences, and the things that were great, we take gratitude for. The things that weren't, we can take responsibility and make changes for. But that's where we start to learn these behaviors that really impact how we relationally connect with money. And the better we understand that, especially when you're doing this with a significant other, partner, or spouse, the better we can start to make progress in doing what we're talking about, which is finding the balance of the objective side of it and finding the balance on the emotional relationship side of it. And you might not know this, but actually there's a book called Happy Money. We'll link to in the show notes. There's a researcher, a PhD, that's what she does. She researches the connection between happiness and money. And what the research has supported is the connection is there really on two things: on giving and on experiences. And when I think about what you and mom have done really well, it's those two things. You have an open hand and a philanthropic mindset, right? And I think it's natural that when you have an open hand and you're willing to give, I think that you look at the rest of your financial picture in a different, in a healthier way. And when you look at experiences, right, those are memories. You talked about, we take an annual trip as a family to the Finger Lakes. Next summer we're looking at a trip to Norway with the group
Hmm.
of all of us. You and mom go on several cruises a year. You've done that since we were, in middle school. So like, I think the experiences and the giving are key components of the financial plan. And we really want to build the plan around to support those areas if those are areas of goals for the individuals.
It's interesting. 2 points you make that I think are super important is we forget about the emotions part of
Yeah.
money, right? We
Yeah.
want to do the X's and O's, but also when it comes back to parenting, if those two are really, really important, right? Those two things, when it comes to parenting, we have to teach our children that really, really young, right? Like, how do we teach our children that giving's important? And there's a bunch of ways that you all talk about how you do that. How do you teach that it's healthy to invest in experiences that create memories, and it's also healthy to save, and it's not all one or the other. It's
That's
all those
exactly
are
right.
aspects of what a successful money plan looks like. And even we've talked about this months ago, but even decisions like what type of car are you going to buy? Like, I often, once in a while, I get this itch, like, oh, I want to buy this really, really nice car. Mom will say, you really want to drive around in a car that's cost more than people's homes? And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. But it's okay if somebody does want to
That's
do
right.
that, if they have the resources. That is really an individualized decision, all of those
Hmm.
decisions. And I think we have to be careful not to pigeonhole ourselves into it's one or the other or the other. I've also seen people be philanthropic to the point that they're punishing themselves,
That's right.
that they can't do anything because they
Yep.
give it all, they want to give everything away because it really jazzes them, but they don't think about what their personal needs are, what other needs are, and what long-term needs are.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing there is individual. I think so often when it comes to finances, we get caught up, whether we know it or we don't know it, and kind of what other people are doing, and really evaluating like, what do we want? What are the things that are most important to us? Not what other people say we should be doing. What do we actually want to be doing? And Ramit Sethi in his book "I Will Teach You to Be Rich," he talks about this as money dials. So find the things that really mean a lot to you and derive significance, and like prioritize them, dial them up, and find the things that you don't care about
And
that you're
dial them
maybe
down.
spending, and dial them down, right?
Right.
And for some people, the dial up might be a car. For others, it might be a dial down, right? Everyone's situation is different. So I love that. Um, let's talk about pursuit of retirement. I think this is interesting because we throw that term around, and for whatever reason, I think as a society, People, if you ask, hey, when are you going to retire? 62, 63, 65, right? And that's kind of a vision they have. It's sort of this idea, this number, this age that we've just thrown out there and we kind of blindly accept. And again, goes back to the individual aspects we're talking about. But when I think about you, right, as someone who's healthy, who enjoys their work, who has the flexibility within your job to do the things that mean the most to you, it really challenges that idea
Sure.
of retirement. Like how are you thinking about the next stage in retirement?
Yeah, it's interesting. Because the world does, I think like this magic number 62, 65 years old. Again, I think it's what I've learned, it's very, very individualized. Some people have to keep working because they have to. That's not my circumstance. I keep working because I love what I do. And I imagine I can't picture the word full retirement, like not doing something every day. So I don't know what that means, but I know
Mm,
that at 64 years old, I'm not thinking of leaving Goodwill for another 4, 5, 6 years, assuming I stay healthy, because I love what I do. And what's also is really important, your mom's retired, but she supports me in what I do and my passions,
mhm.
and we work that out because I think sometimes that could be a challenge for couples, right?
Yep.
One person's retired, wants to do this and that. I'm fortunate to have a job that I do have a lot of flexibility in, significant vacation time. And the most important, if you work for somebody else, I have an incredible, we're a nonprofit, so I have a board of directors as my boss, an incredible nonprofit that we talk transparently about who I am as an individual, what the goals are of the company for the board of directors, what my goals are, and they lean into other things I want to do. So I
Mm,
recently um, went to them and just went to the chair of the board and said, I thought about leaving to do more consulting, but like, why do I want to do that? And I asked myself, why do I want to go and do consulting? I used to do it. I enjoyed it. The reason I want to do it is I miss that interaction with
yeah.
entrepreneurs and problem solving. And I found an outlet with that, and the board supported it. So I created a LinkedIn newsletter
Mhm.
and launched it. And I talk about entrepreneurship and I talk about social innovation. And I have got so much feedback from people that said, I had you in class or I worked with you. That is feeding that part of me that I was
Mhm.
missing. So
Mhm.
I hate, I
The
don't want to,
teacher. Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to oversell. I don't want any of you coming for my job, but I got a good gig that works for me. And I am not putting a date on retirement. I'm putting on the, if it's not fun anymore, if it's too challenging, if there's a health situation, that
Yeah.
will be a different discussion. But for now, I'm taking that word off the table. I'm going to live and create, maybe do more experiences, maybe take a couple extra vacations. We try to get down, away to see the boys and do things with
Mhm.
the girls. All that's important, and I think retirement would afford more of that, but not enough to walk away from a job to just think you're going to do that full time, because we're not.
Yeah, and not everyone, right, is lucky enough to be in a position where you love the work that you're doing and you feel a sense of contribution, right? Because we know, I mean, it's pretty darn clear, like you're getting, yeah, you're working, you're getting paid, but you're getting a lot of intrinsic value because you feel like every day you're making an impact and contributing, whether that be to the larger organization, whether that be down to the store level because of the efforts that you're doing, whether that be because of the impact you're having of other entrepreneurs or leading your staff. Like if you just pull the plug on that because of this illusion of like, I want to retire and do my own thing, we often underestimate what a gap that can be of the
Sure.
contribution that you're making, right? So I think there's just a ton of wisdom in what you're sharing there, and really making sure, again, going back to the individual aspect, like what do you want? What provides value? Oh, and by the way, you've put yourself in a position financially that if something changes, whether that be health, whether that be something with your organization changes, something where you're no longer whatever, you have a choice you can make. And I think that that's such a message we try to convey to our listeners, that you want your financial plan to be designed in a way that gives you options, choice, and flexibility. And that takes time and hard work. You've saved for a long period of time, but you now are in that position of choice that as long as it's going how you want it to go, you keep doing what you're doing. But if something changes, that's okay. Like you're going to be
Yeah.
okay.
No, for sure. It's certainly nice. I'm sure there are people that are trapped because they didn't plan successfully, right? And are maybe even trapped and have to work longer. That's not my position.
Yeah,
I'm fortunate that I could walk out today and we're fine. Everything's fine. But that
yeah,
did come through lots of planning. And when we talk about financial planning, it's not just about money. It's about other things like healthcare and long-term care and all those type of things
that's
that
right.
build safety nets around you, or things that are, again, probably very individualized to what the needs of the person is, or what they feel safe around. But we've got all that, so we're in a spot where we could, just stop, which that freedom allows you to really dive in deeper into
Hmm.
what you're doing, because you're not worried about, oh, I have to do this or that,
Right.
to make sure I keep my job, or I don't want to do something that might push the envelope a little bit because I can't afford to lose my job,
Hmm.
and being surrounded by people that support you is really, really critical.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been a joy and by far not even close. I mean it. My favorite episode we've done in 363 episodes. So I can't wait for this to get out to the community. I know it's one that I'll be able to go back and listen to for some time. So thank you so much, Dad,
Yeah.
for taking the
Well,
time. I love you and appreciate you
yeah.
sharing your journey with us.
You are welcome. I love you too, and happy Father's Day.
Happy
I know
Father's Day.
it will be here in a day or two, right? It's coming quickly. So thanks so much. Appreciate having you again. Love you. Say hi to everybody, and we'll chat again soon.
We'll do. And for our listeners, if you want to connect with my dad, we'll link on the show notes to his LinkedIn profile. Make sure to check out his newsletter as well. It's great stuff. So thanks so much, Dad. Take care.
Take care.
As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.